value exchange creates wealth. When people think that there's a finite pie and there's only so much to go around, then they get irrational. But look, money and pie aren't even close to the same thing. Like, yeah, when someone eats a piece of pie, that pie is now smaller. If they take too big a piece, there's less left for everyone else. And that's what scarcity wants you to think.
The guest that I have today, I met back in, I believe it was 2014, sitting front row at a massive event. He gets on stage and he starts talking about money. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm a financial advisor at a high level. What is this guy even talking about? My guest today is Garrett Gunderson, and he is somebody that has inspired what we do each and every single day, probably more than any one person. It doesn't just go back to his books. It goes back to his message, his story, and everything else. And let me open it up with this. This is something right from Garrett. In order to design a game you can win, you must first know the game you're playing. Today, Garrett and I are going to rant, we're going to rave, and we're going to talk about the game you all need to win. And that game is money. Garrett, welcome to the show.
It's really good to be with you, man. I just moved into a brand new house, so I don't have all my lighting quite perfect yet. But this is my brand new office, and just kind of fun to see the physical manifestation of ideas, right? And to be able to have a place that's one of the top views when I'm creating. When I walk out there, there's a whole valley that I look into, and yeah, man, it's really cool to hear that you were, I remember Secret Knock and the fact that it impacted you, didn't know it impacted you at that level. So that's very meaningful. Like, I like being connected to the stories. I like to see the progress, because sometimes I'm in an isolated fashion every now and again when I'm writing, right? And then you hear about people reading the books and doing something about it. So I commend you for that and the work that you're up to, man.
Absolutely. In the book, Killing Sacred Cows and What Would the Rockefellers Do? Like, just the names make somebody grab it and be like, now that's got to be one I'm going to read. And, if any of you haven't read those books, you got to grab them, because they are meaningful and impactful. And it's exactly what we're going to be talking about. But Garrett, you didn't come from being the financial genius as you're known of, in the circles that we float in. You come from a very humble beginning. So can we just real quickly just kind of go through where you came from and how did you arrive at this moment where you're like, I feel like everything I've learned about money is a lie, and I want the truth. I want to know, what do the wealthy do? What do the Rockefellers do? How did that moment come to you?
Look, man, my parents grew up in this little tiny town, Dragerton, Utah, which just sounds like a small town, right? Like population 100, I don't know, it's so little. And my dad was a coal miner. His dad, my mom's dad, were coal miners, and even my great grandfather was a coal miner. And so I've never stepped foot in a coal mine, because my family was really committed to me doing something else, and they really invested in me to figure out something. And when I was 15 years old, I wanted to earn some money. And my dad would bring home these service vehicles from the mine, and I would help him clean them because they were for the bosses when they come in. And he also said, hey, you get good grades and take care of your stuff, you can have this 1975 Chevy pickup, which at the time I lived in Price, Utah, a little bit bigger town of 12,000. And I mean, a pickup truck is a staple there, right? Like, so I start fixing that up. I start helping him clean these things. And then my mom was working at a credit union. I started cleaning the repossessed vehicles there. And soon enough, I won $500 for being third place for the Rural Young Entrepreneur. The next year I won first place, and then won it with state, and that came with $5,000. And I wanted to invest the money. I just thought, man, I want to get out of this little town. I thought Salt Lake City was a big, intimidating city at the time. And I thought, maybe I could invest this money. But my mom, she put cash in coffee cans, they saved everything that they had, and they were very worried about losing the money. And so I didn't really have their permission to sign off as a custodian. So when I was finally 18 years old, I started to interview people that were in the financial world, from people who were much, graduated way before me in our fraternity, and interviewing them if they worked at banks, and then just talking to people and their parents were in the world of finance. And so I got offered an internship when I was 19 years old, which sounds nice, but it was really about peddling life insurance and mutual funds to family and friends. But I did learn a little bit, and this is where the turning point happens, because I was doing that in 98, 99. The market was just going up and anyone could make money. But then in 2000, the market started to decline, right? I think about it as like family and friends, and I didn't feel good about them losing money. And these financial firms are like, well, tell them the market's on sale. They're telling them they're in it for the long haul. And I just didn't like those answers. And so I had enough money for my car detailing business and winning some money for presenting that business. And so I decided for that next 26 months, I traveled somewhere once a month and I invested that money in education. And not the education of going to school. I was on scholarship. This was the education of money. And what was cool is because I was young, I could meet with people that were pretty well known in the financial space because they kind of like that young ambition. And I watched them with clients and I went to different symposiums that they were teaching at. And I learned pretty quickly that I was not doing things that were going to be in the best long-term interest, which was really hard to face and tell my clients to actually find someone else or move to cash until I could figure out something better. And I just figured out 4 things pretty early on. There were 4 things I could find that were guaranteed in finance. If you could save on tax, if you could save on interest, if you could save on non-performing fees and hidden commissions, and if you could save on duplicate coverages or improper structure with insurance. So I actually became an efficiency nerd. And I started looking at like, how can we help people keep more of what they make? And I met these 2 other really young guys and then a 3rd young guy. And we were just traveling everywhere and learning all that we could and questioning everything. We were so damn annoying to everybody after a while. People called us fanatics. And like Les, one of my business partners, would get up in front of like 500 people at a financial event, training financial advisors, and argue or question the guy at the front of the room. I was always like, damn, dude, he was so bold. And we would just pick things apart. And I just had a fascination with it because I didn't want to harm my family and friends. And I wanted to be wealthy. I mean, when I was young, I kind of tied up a lot of my value in my net worth. I tied up a lot of my value in the amount of money that I made. And so I was ambitious, maybe for the wrong reasons, but at least got me started. And some of my early clients were my grandparents, which we were able to add $250,000 tax-free to their estate when they died, which doesn't sound like a lot to people, but their home was worth $29,000 when they died. They grew up in a really small town and 2 of their kids had kidney transplants within 2 years of their death. And we helped pay for all the co-pays and deductibles through just financial strategy that didn't require risk. So thankfully they trusted me and encouraged me, even though my mom was nervous that I was being an entrepreneur and I should get a job and something that was safe. And most of those jobs weren't safe. In '99, when I graduated, I got offered a job at Strong Investments. They were the #2 investment company in the world as far as growth was concerned and performance at the time, out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They're no longer around. I got offered American Investment Bank. They're no longer around. Arthur Andersen, which was then Andersen, which is now not around. I mean, all these things that were supposed to be financial security and stability weren't, because a lot of it was putting my life in someone else's hands and then becoming a cog in the wheel to promote something that I don't think was going to help people at the highest level. So it was kind of fortunate, even though it was frustrating, to have that moment where I was not doing good for my clients and I was putting them in harm's way. But fortunately, I was honest with them. All but one got out of the market in the year 2000 and didn't have the next 2.5 years of downturn. And I did pick up a couple cool strategies along the way, which didn't last, but I got a 41% rate of return in 2001 and a 44% in 2002, because all we did was we moved everyone to cash. And when the stock market had a big uptick in the United States, we moved them international overnight and then moved them back to cash. So they're out of cash 85, 86% of the time. And they were getting huge returns because we were just following this trend. But then a lot of the retirement plans started creating trade restrictions, or they wouldn't post for 24 hours. Or if you trade more than once a month, there was a redemption fee. So that part was short-lived, but that was my fascination. And I just wanted to figure out what was right. And I didn't really care who was right, because I, at the time, was like, well, I want to become wealthy by being a good investor, not just selling investments. And that was my initial thought process, which had its challenges and lessons along the way as well. But for one short question, that's a fairly long answer.
That was great. And, I'm just going to put a couple placeholders there. You were talking about, how you moved almost all your clients out right before the .com crash, which most people didn't. They rode the roller coaster straight down again in 2008. Now, the interesting part about that story is where you were talking about control. And especially I want everybody to understand, we were just talking about, early 90s and into the 2000s. Now let's fast forward to now, where we're talking about control. One of the biggest problems I think people have when it comes to their money is they are taught from a very young age. Heck, I mean, technically, since they're a baby, they're being preconditioned to give up control of their money to somebody else. Like, we're not good stewards of our money. We're not smart enough to handle and manage our money. So you have to give up control of that money to someone else, like a financial advisor like you and I were. And in giving up control, you're literally giving up almost your financial future. And I will tell you, you were in the financial world in the early 2000s, but I wasn't. I was a pro snowboarder running snowboard shops. I had a financial advisor, and I had all my money in those fancy dancy mutual funds that they said I was going to be wealthy just with what I was doing. And the dot-com crash happened. You obviously know that my mutual funds plummeted tremendously. My retail stores plummeted. And the biggest thing that happened out of that is it forced me to go from my businesses and seek a job. I was either going to deliver pizzas at Little Caesars with my friend Mike or find a job. And my resume was out. And the only companies that called me were Wall Street companies. That was it. Financial companies were the only ones that wanted this punk snowboard kid. And I landed in that world as an advisor, thinking it was a part-time thing, but it ended up being something I loved. And I did that for 16 years. I had that same epiphany. It took me much longer than you because, man, I wore those rosy colored glasses. I got a pair of them back here, those little red glasses. I wore those rosy colored glasses that the financial companies made us wear. And we listened to those big consultants that came down from New York City. All right, here's what you're going to do. Here's how you're going to help your clients. We weren't helping our clients listening to them. We were helping them, their bottom line, helping that managing partner or that broker make the most amount of money by selling the highest fee account. You had that realization, and I had it not when you said, but I had it in about 2014 when I really was at a high level. I was doing just, separately managed accounts, RIAs. I was at an RIA, and I started seeing things that scared me, things that were completely against what the client's needs and goals were, but things that were great for the company. And I did that all the way up to 2018 when I retired, sold my practice, and I was already doing, what we're going to talk about, which is privatized banking and also the infinite banking concept. But it took me a lot longer than you. So you had a huge head start. But the one thing I'm going to ask you before we kind of really dive into this is, what does money mean to you?
Money is a byproduct. It's a storage of value. It's a man-made efficient tool to exchange with one another. So it's really means efficiency. It really means utilization. And what it allows me to do is focus on what I do very best and then allow other people to do what they do very best so we can exchange with one another. And when money exchanges through goods, services, solving problems, serving others, value is created. But because we don't want to barter, I think barter is pretty inefficient. Money became something that was extraordinarily useful. The problem is because people got intimidated and confused by it, because people gave up their time for money, because people do things they hate in the name of earning money and become defined by money, it gets a bad rap. So if we look at it as a store of energy that could then be utilized in the future, that's a pretty great resource. And I look at it more than anything as a companion. If it's our only benchmark, it is a thief of joy, of enjoy. But if it's a companion that helps us measure value, that helps us understand whether or not what we're doing is actually impacting someone else, then it becomes a tool. And when we treat it as the tool in the proper context, it becomes extraordinarily useful for people to interact with one another in an interdependent way.
So then something along the way was broken. Because if your definition of money is spot on, it's exactly what it is. And how you described where money becomes a tool was something I'd never heard, but so powerful. So why is it that so many people don't understand that? Why is it so many people look at money as evil? Oh, wealthy people are evil. They just take from others. Wealthy people are the ones putting, they're the ones out there giving the most amount of money, but we won't even go there. So the next thing I want to know is, what are the lies people are being taught about money?
Look, we can just break this down into two simple camps. One camp is the camp of scarcity. Scarcity is a viewpoint or perspective of fear, doubt, and worry. In scarcity, we believe in the zero-sum game, that one person's gain is at the loss of another. It's survival of the fittest type of thing. It's a tug of war. You got to take what's yours and hold on to what you got. And scarcity will destroy wealth because no amount of luck or saving, no amount of discipline, no rate of return, no financial advisor will save someone in scarcity, because scarcity is the greatest destroyer of wealth. When someone has a perspective of scarcity, they think profit is evidence of deception, coercion, and theft. And therefore, they think I'll be a good person, but I won't do that. But then they get trapped in that zero-sum game, where the reality is we're in a world of abundance. And in the world of abundance, we believe in faith, hope, and value. Those are the core tenets. We look at innovation and ingenuity, and exchange as our means of production. And production is actually evidence of value creation, because money follows value. And when we become value creators, we're going to have more money in our lives. But the reality is, when we're small-minded in scarcity, we don't have vision. Vision is the ultimate container in which we live into. It tells our brain what's important and what to pay attention to. When we're stuck in survival, we are irrational and we don't do things that are valuable. When we think more in a thriving type of standpoint, asking the question, how do I impact more people, or how do I more deeply impact people? And when we do that effectively, money becomes something that tags along. But when people put money ahead of purpose, when people put money ahead of people, then they actually start to get a blackened soul. And that's where money gets a bad reputation, is because it's out of context, and because it's when it's people out of their own character doing it at their own sacrifice, then they lose who they are. And so this is a heavy concept, but the reality is we have choice. We have choice in the matter. See, when I spend $1, like when you bought my books, I got the money, but it took me a lot of time and money to write those books. It didn't take you that much time and money to pay for those books. But the reality is, because I wrote the book, I already have the knowledge. So I was happy to receive those dollars, and we both ended up wealthier. You paid for something, I got the value. You got something that I put value into, and we both walked away wealthier. See, value exchange creates wealth. And when people think that there's a finite pie and there's only so much to go around, then they get irrational. But look, money and pie aren't even close to the same thing. Like, yeah, when someone eats a piece of pie, that pie is now smaller. If they take too big a piece, there's less left for everyone else. And that's what scarcity wants you to think. But money has infinite exchange, as long as we're not devaluing it through printing it or fractionalized banking it. But the reality is, the more times money exchanges hands, the more velocity, the more wealth. And let's look at this. If we go back to King Louis, right, who lived in the Palace of Versailles, you and I have a better life. One, we have plumbing that had to be atrocious. So they're just dumping buckets of sewage that had to smell to high heaven. We have air conditioning. We have more food choice. We could travel pretty much anywhere in the world within 24 hours, which would have taken, 24 days to get even a small distance back in those days. And he had to have 1,000 servants on things that technology provides for us. Part of it's because we've have compounded ideas. Someone has an idea, everyone that used to have to pay for it, now a lot of that is cheap or even free. So as much as we're seeing some of the middle class have downward pressure with inflation, we're also seeing more wealth today than we've ever seen before if people understand abundance and value creation. If you don't understand value creation, then you're going to be in a struggle. You're going to see money as complicated and confusing and as something that's only for the few and all that kind of stuff. So I have obviously a lot of opinion. I've thought about this very deeply, but I think it's really critical. Money follows value. How can you become a value creator? You've got hidden capital within you. The first hidden capital is your mental capital. Mental capital is your ideas, knowledge, wisdom, insight, strategies, and tools. We also have relationship capital. This is relationship capital here. People, networks, organizations, mentors, friends, and family. And the bridge between mental and relationship capital is exchange. Many times exchange happens through business. And when that happens efficiently, we become more wealthy. And when we start sharing more freely with value, we start getting paid better than holding tight to it or being afraid of it or cowering at it or trying to take or hold on. And so this is where truly scarcity becomes our biggest enemy.
And you came from the financial world like I did. And I know you know what I'm about to say, but the audience may not. When I was an advisor, I think other advisors, it would be pretty safe to say that they would eat their young. There was such a scarcity mindset around everything we did. Every client was ours. We didn't want to share. It was just like, why did you call my client? I didn't know it was your client. Yes, you did. There was just, you were always almost like thinking that there was just a small little pool of money that we had to get. And there was only a small amount of clients that we had to get when it was an abundant amount of clients. There's no way we could have ever helped people. But see, that's the problem I feel like in the whole financial world is we are not taught as financial advisors to go out and solve people's problems. We are taught to solve our problem
And
by
sell.
then maybe solving somebody else's problem by selling them a product or
Selling,
charging
yeah.
them a fee. It is completely broken. And the problem with that is it's, you know, people are brought up under that system where really that industry, the financial world, is about serving the financial advisor first, and then maybe helping you as the client second. And listen, if you're an advisor watching this, you're probably not going to like me, but you know what? You know, this is the truth. 16 years I spent there. Garrett, how many years were you an advisor?
Look, I dropped all my licenses in 2005. So from 1998 to 2005, and then I started this other path. But I will say this. These are well-intentioned. You were well-intentioned. I was well-intentioned, but we were built into a system that created a moral hazard. And what that moral hazard is that in order for us to get paid, a transaction had to occur. And that transaction was playing by a rule that the institutions weren't playing. Like the institutions aren't trying to accumulate wealth over 30 years. They're trying to create cash flow from day one. The institutions aren't saying it takes money to make money. No, it takes your money for them to make money. They don't need high risk for high return because you're taking the risk and they're getting a fee regardless of the return. Now, obviously they want you to do well, but if you don't, it's not like they forfeit what they make. They still make their part. And so it's really this antiquated system that unfortunately well-intentioned advisors are having to be compensated or choosing to be compensated in a way that might not serve the client very best, right? Because it's transactional and it's frustrating and it's been functional for the institutions, but let's just look at the stats. US Department of Labor came out and said 95% of people at age 65 are not financially independent. If they stop working, their income is not suffice to maintain their lifestyle. And look, retirement planning is at, I think, its scariest time since I've been alive. And this is why. People are being taught to build a nest egg. You know, we spoke these words back in the day, build a nest egg, and then you get to live off the interest. Well, guess what? When you're retired, interest rates are so stinking low with traditional financial products that your distributions or interest that you're earning on that is so inconsequential that even if you're a millionaire on paper, you're a pauper in real life because maybe your $1 million kicks off 20 grand a year. The second danger that people are now facing is with the amount of money that we're putting into the economy, and they say it's being printed, but it's not even being printed. It's simply being added to computer screens. And when it's added to computer screens, ultimately inflation starts confiscating purchasing power. So in retirement, your purchasing power is going down every year against these costs. But the other thing about printing money that's happening is how are they going to pay for that? Well, eventually they're talking about raising taxes. So if you're living off of fixed interest with higher taxes and inflation lowering your purchasing power, it's not an American dream. It's really a ream where people are buying into the wrong things. And the worst part about it is when we're told, hey, just sacrifice, save early, often, and always, invest no matter what, because your dollar cost average and compound interest will take care of you. People don't find out until it's too late that it's a problem. And now this entire life that they've been working towards isn't what it was promised to be. And what are you going to do about it? That's why what you're teaching is so important. That's why we're talking about this in a way that hopefully it wakes you up, but doesn't scare you. There is alternatives. It's not like we're here just doomsdaying. It's just a set it and forget it mentality. And that waiting for 30 years isn't working. It's really about cash flow. It's about increasing your ability to deliver value yourself. It's about investing back into yourself. It's about putting money in places that you have access to it between now and 59 and a half, rather than having it locked away. It's about protecting the downside. When the market goes down, you don't have to participate in the downside. And when there's a bunch of crazy things going on like today and there's opportunity, you have access to capital instead of having it completely invested in companies that you know nothing about and that you would probably never support otherwise. So not that I have any opinion about this stuff, but you know, that's my soapbox right there.
So now that we kind of see the problem, and that problem is about to escalate here pretty quick with the amount of money the government's printing, the amount of inflation that's running rampant. Oh, it's transitionary. Kiss my ass. It's transitionary, but we won't go there. Let's talk a little bit about not the storm that's about to come, but let's talk about what people can do to change the environment in which their money operates. Because, you know, I think that's the biggest problem. As the late Nelson Nash said, it's not so much, you know, the problem of what people have learned. It's a problem about the environment. like an airplane flying in a headwind. That plane can't go any faster no matter what you do to modify that plane. You have to change the environment in which the plane flies. We've all flown on a plane. When you're going into a headwind, the pilot comes on and says, we're running a little late. We're going to notify the gates ahead that, there's a headwind and we're going to be a little late. You might have to run. Or you're on a plane where you're going with a perpetual tailwind and the pilot's like, hey, we're going to arrive early. It's going to be a nice, smooth flight. We got a nice, strong tailwind. And you all know that. Well, your money operating in the environment you've been taught is operating with a complete headwind, and it will never change. But all people need to do is really add one step or change one thing and have their money then operate in that perpetual environment. And that perpetual thing is compound interest, what Albert Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, the most powerful thing in the universe. Those that understand it earn it. Those that don't pay it. But everybody has been taught to make compound interest. They have to put their money somewhere and just say, I'm just going to leave it there. And then all of a sudden, everything you just talked about, from inflation to, market risks and everything else, hits you. And then someday later, that statistic plays in where either you're part of the 95 or the 5%, depending on what you did, when all they should have learned is, let's change the environment and where their money operates. Nelson Nash coined this the infinite banking concept. And I love it. And Garrett, I'm sure this kind of just makes the hair on your arm stand up when you get an advisor says, oh, infinite banking policies, or that infinite banking thing is whole life. Like, they all think that infinite banking is a product. Infinite banking is a process. So can I have you just explain a little bit about this wonderful environment where our money can operate with a perpetual tailwind called compound interest, but yet we don't lose access, control, or the ability to use and move our money all the time, just like the banks do, the wealthy do, and everybody else?
Well, look, one of the things I was talking about at the beginning was these 4 I's: IRS, interest, and investments, and insurance. And when there's drag on that, look, if you remove that drag and then you can actually recover that cash and put it back into the system, that's part of that that tailwind pushing you forward. So I know some people think, well, I'm putting my money in a 401k and I'm not paying tax. I'm like, well, you're deferring tax and delaying it, which is not the same as saving it. One means you don't have to, one means you don't have to right now. And I always have this joke, because who doesn't want to wait till they're older and crankier to finally pay their taxes? Like, I think the first time I heard my grandma say the F word was when she was 70 and a half. I said, Grandma, you got to start pulling some money out of your retirement plan, otherwise you get a penalty. And she goes, what's the penalty? I said, well, on the distribution amount, it's 50%. So that's pretty substantial. Plus you still have to pay your tax. And she didn't like that because she thought she was in a tax savings vehicle. So, it's kind of, I look at that like, yeah, it feels like a tailwind, but it drives you into the ground in the end when you find out 90% of it's going away. So,
Garrett, I just real quick on that, I wish everybody would read the book by Ted. It's called 501k. And he's the founder of the 401k. He literally pioneered and invented the 401k until the government took it and made it what they want. Everybody needs to read that book to understand why 401ks aren't your friend. And then it's chapter 1 of his book, he talks about exactly what we're about to dive into.
Well, look, man, a 401k is an amazing deal for financial institutions. Let me just break that down really quick. You put in your money pre-tax, but now they get the fees on the pre-tax money. So they're getting money, they're earning a fee on your money and the government's money. So when you put money in a retirement plan, like an IRA or 401k, or for you Canadians, an RRSP, you're putting money in pre-tax. And then what happens is that you're paying a fee. Now, if you want that money back out the next day and you're not 59 and a half, you have a 10% tax disadvantage, not advantage. So imagine 10 grand goes in. Hey, your account shows up. I've got $10,000. This is awesome. But if you want to pull it out, you got to pay 30% tax, 10% penalty. So you really only have $6,000. So it's kind of one of these situations that absolutely, is misleading, because what's on paper doesn't show up in your life. What I want is tax advantage type of structure where if taxes fluctuate, I have additional, things that I can do. So when I put my money at 19 years old, I started my first insurance plan. I now have 27 of them because as I make more money, I've opened up more accounts.
People never understand that. We got to talk about that later.
Yeah. It's been a never fail me strategy because I've been able to utilize the cash to buy a cabin that has gone up substantially in value. And I was able to get it because I had cash, and other people that were financing, I got the cabin and they didn't. So It was helpful when I was in a bidding war because cash is it's basically king in that moment. Once I earn a dividend, it's guaranteed. It doesn't go down. When I want to pull out money, it's FIFO, which means I get to pull out the dollars I put in first, tax-free, before I pull out the interest, where almost every other investment is LIFO, last in, first out. So if you do a traditional IRA and you put in post-tax dollars, they always give you your interest back first and your principal back second. So it's hard to get to those dollars that would be tax-free. Plus, I do have the capability to borrow, where I use my money as collateral, or I could even use my money as collateral with the bank and get a low interest rate, or I could use the insurance company's money and use it to borrow, which I've done a lot of lately because there's a lot of opportunity. I sat on cash and didn't touch it from 2015 to 2020. Just sat on cash inside of my cash value, earning like 5%, nothing to be too excited about, but not with tax. So that's more like an 8% deal. And I just wasn't stressed. It was a medium-term storage for my money. But now that there's opportunity, I've been using it like crazy. And by utilizing that, it's been extraordinarily effective. And I could put the money back in when I want, which I actually just put quite a bit of money back in because I sold my old home and it came with a bunch of gains with it. So I put the money back in. So it's a really nice facility that way. But I have plenty of ways to maneuver taxes because of that, right? Or I have multiple tax advantaged options, not just tax deferral. I got tax-free options and tax efficient options with that. So I like that it's protected from bankruptcy and liability. I've never gone bankrupt, but hey, it's nice to know that that is protected because I've seen people that have had exposed money that have gone bankrupt. So that's a big advantage. Usually when you're wealthy, people want your money. So liability protection is super useful. And in my book, What Would Billionaires Do is the updated title of What Would Rockefellers Do, because the Rockefeller family reached out to us and asked us to change the title. But the good news is we didn't have to change any of the content in the book. They didn't disagree with any of the things in the content. They just didn't want us to, be using their name to do promotions. So that's fine. But I talk about how I like to buy net worth. So I have this death benefit that I buy, I build cash flow. And I could actually use that death benefit to do charitable strategies in the future that might boost my cash flow 20 to 50%. So there's so much advantage with it. It's a place that I store and put a bunch of cash in. And then I've used that cash multiple times over the years because I started doing it. My first policy I bought was June of 1998. $50 a month. That's where I started. Didn't fund it properly, didn't know the whole system, but it was a good starting point. Now I overfund that and build even more cash and then use the cash when the time is appropriate. But I always make sure that those investments are doing better than 10% if I'm using that cash. And what I find is it's hard to get really sustainable 10% rates of return year in and year out, but you can get short-term bursts of return over 90 days or 1 year that could be much higher than that because you're investing in buying a business or a specific type of real estate or cryptocurrency or something like that. So I like to use it for short bursts, put it back, use it, put it back. And what I do is something that was written about in like the New Yorker by Malcolm Gladwell years ago. He researched all these people and said, these guys aren't really like investing like the rest of us. They sit on cash, and then when the time is right, they pounce on the opportunities. So I like to look for the opportunities. And then when there's not opportunities, I don't lose any sleep because I'm earning 800% more than a savings account by having my cash value sitting there. So that's kind of one of my methodologies that, that I do. And I interviewed Nelson a couple times years ago. He wasn't always the easiest guy to get an answer out of. And, when I wanted to get into the details, he always liked to use analogies, but it was definitely, and he's an interesting character in the world for sure.
That might have had something to do with the fact, he was with a large insurance company and had to play by that compliance rule. So,
well, he told me that first I said, someone asked him if what he did was compliant. And he goes, well, I'm Christian and Jesus Christ wasn't compliant and they crucified him for it. I was like, well, that's an interesting way to start an event. And I kind of look like Jesus. So I thought, I don't want to get in any trouble here, but yeah, he was a character.
So let me kind of go into this storage of wealth that we're talking about, which, for anybody that's wondering what this awesome vehicle is that Garrett's referring to, it is what you all know of called a whole life insurance policy. But as soon as I say that, Garrett, I know half of my audience is like, oh, here we go. you know darn well they're like, oh, that's a terrible place to put your money. You know, that other guru out there, that Ramsey guy said that's a terrible place. That Susie girl said that's a terrible place.
That's chapter 2 of my book.
I know
those two people right up front.
And you know, and the thing is what was that first vehicle that you had? You said, what was that truck?
1975 Chevy pickup.
All right. So 1975
Silverado.
Chevy Silverado. So I want everybody to envision that truck, right? And you know what that truck looks like, or you at least know what a Silverado would look like today. You know, it's an okay truck. It'll get you from point A to point B and it'll haul some stuff. But then I want you to picture the HD version of that, the heavy duty one with the black wheels, like the really fancy one with the diesel engine. And then I want you to picture, you take that fancy blown out Silverado to a shop and you have everything done from wheels to lift kits. You have the engine completely redone. You take it to the nth degree. And you put two of these trucks in the same parking lot and you look at them. Now, first off, both of those trucks are the exact same thing. They're a Chevy Silverado. Do they both perform the same? Absolutely not. Do they both look the same? No way. Which one do you want to drive? You certainly want to drive the one that's all fixed up, but wait a second, they're both Silverados. They should be exactly the same. People think that all whole lives are exactly the same. They think that the whole life is like that Silverado, and there is no other variation of the Silverado. Heck, I bet you Chevy's got 20 different models of just the Silverado, but everybody just thinks, oh, there's only one whole life. A whole life policy can be designed and engineered to do almost anything you want. We just happen to design and engineer them to solve people's problems, money problems for that matter. But when people hear the word whole life, they think it's like a swear word. They think it's just this terrible thing.
I heard it's a hole that you throw your money into is what I heard when I was 18.
Great. I mean, hey, and maybe
and look, man, if you're buying a state farm policy that's underfunded, they're probably right. You know,
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. But that's the thing, you know, like the misconceptions, the myths, the lies that people are taught about money are insane. Because if people just knew, why is it that the wealthy use this? Why is it that the one time I really questioned everything, I was talking to a guy that ran a family office, and like a family office, just so everybody knows, is like big time. Like these guys manage sometimes hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars and up. Okay. The
Rockefellers kind of coined the term family office because Correct. They were so wealthy. They had an office that worked only for their family. So their own CPA, their own attorneys, their own investment advisors that work just for their family. But as time's gone on, now a family office might mean a family office might take on 100 clients, but it's all the same comprehensive, communicating, coordinated professionals. And it's such a strategic advantage. And the good news is you don't have to be worth billions of dollars to have them anymore. I mean, that's been one of my missions, is to bring the family office concept to the masses. Not an easy thing, but that's been a big part of what I've been up to. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's important that people understand that, you know, but back then, like all I knew of is a family office as what I would consider a fairly high level advisor in my capacity. I'm talking to this guy who ran this family office, and I'm just saying, so when you have capital, like right now, this is just after 2008, I'm like, where do you keep your capital? Where do you get a yield for your clients? And he says, well, we have systems of privatized banking set up. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds cool. So you bought some banks and you just operate a bank. He said, no, whole life insurance. I'm like, wait, what? And he starts telling me about this, and he starts telling me about how it works. Like they put money in and they immediately redeploy that money for opportunities. And those opportunities could be everything from buying cars for the family and then just recapturing and recycling money. I mean, it was so intricate that it went right over my head. And I was an advisor. But the thing is I think the biggest problem in people's knowledge curve is they aren't exposed to this. And even when they are taught this, the first thing they think is, that sounds too good to be true. How is it that people can stop? Or what would be the advice you'd give to somebody that hears about this, but then they go talk to their advisor? Hey, this guy, I just heard this awesome presentation from this Garrett guy, and he's talking about this infinite banking concept, these specially designed and engineered whole lives. And their advisor said, oh, there's no way that works. That's a scam. And then the client, more than likely, and 9 times out of 10 says, that's what I thought. I knew it. How do you handle that? Like, because that's the barrier that everyone's up against. They are up against lies and myths because of misinformation and knowledge that these advisors don't have and never will. Because if advisors did what we did, just so everybody knows, their commission would be cut between 60 and 90%. Right. And I don't think you'll find an advisor that wants to take a 60 to 90% cut in pay.
And that's the big thing, is that right there is we're looking at the actual performance. And looking at the numbers. And, I don't really look at the numbers anymore, but I did. When I first learned about this, I went to 11 software schools with this guy, Todd Langford, who designed and engineered and showed how everything works. So I got really deeply connected to it. And instead of having opinion of like, well, 401k is good or bad, or whole life is good or bad, I would actually look at the data and then make the decisions based upon that. And what you said with, they're cutting 2/3 of the commissions out. How do people make money? Well, there's still commissions and there's still an ability to serve more people. Most advisors, they're not meeting with enough people as part of the problem. And when you're doing the right thing and you're doing this kind of education, you just get a lot more attention and you can continue to design these properly. So, a lot of it comes down to being educated. If we look at Susie and Dave, they have a philosophy, and their philosophy is this simple: live within your means. But they only think of one of 3 ways to live within the means. So the first way to live within your means is to budget. And I'm here to tell you, if you're a train wreck spending more money than you make, maybe you should budget. But there's 2 other ways to live within your means: be more efficient within your means and expand your means. Let's talk about efficiency. If you're not paying tax on your gains, that's more efficient. If you don't have to pay for term insurance because you have a permanent death benefit, that's more efficient. If you have access to your capital, but instead of just leaving it in a savings account, you're getting dividends that could be paying 5%, that's much more effective and efficient. So we're looking at the full process where their entire mindset is, how do we lower expenses? But no one shrinks their way to wealth. If someone follows Dave and Susie's advice to a T, they can definitely have money that they'll never enjoy. Saturday Night Live did a skit on Susie about this guy worth $20 million calling in and saying he wanted to go to Europe. And she goes, no, go to the Keys. But he lived in Miami. He goes, I've been to the Keys. I don't want to go there. She goes, don't spend money, right? There's so much of that message. Someone gave me a Dave Ramsey book as a joke, which was all these questions people asked me answered. And one of the parents wrote it and said, our daughter's followed your stuff so much, but we can't ever get her to spend any money at all. Because if you follow that natural conclusion that its expenses are bad, then you actually stop utilizing other people's gifts and talents, do too much on your own, and you end up becoming a miser that doesn't end up being as productive as you could be. You're less likely to invest in yourself. So if we're looking at the overall, like I've done reaction videos to Dave, and ultimately he's so dogmatic about it. He just goes, oh, why would you want to put more money in it? That's like saying, well, why would you want to put more money into a business? Well, because maybe it's going to grow. Maybe it has more impact. Why would you put money in a vehicle? Well, you're telling people to put money in mutual funds. Why would you put more money in it? Well, because you're telling them it's going to grow. So, it's just because the entire framework is reduction, and reductionist thinking will only get you so far. I came from a family that, and early on in my life, I read The Millionaire Next Door, which that book is a guide that says, don't ever spend money and you can end up with a bunch. And sure, if you become a miserable millionaire or a broke millionaire, or you never spend money, you can end up with a lot of cash. But what good is cash if you never deploy it? What good is cash if you never utilize it? And so their entire methodology and philosophy is on reduction of expenses, which is easy to teach people, hard for those people to implement. There's tons of studies coming out saying budgeting isn't helping, it's actually harming people, because they get into a place where they're restrictive so much that they eventually rebel against it and spend more money long term. That was in Time magazine recently. My belief is pay yourself first, automatically save some money, and then when that money's saved, then you can funnel it through your cash values. And then when the right opportunities come, you have the cash values to capitalize on that. It's a different methodology. It's finding money that you're losing to taxes, insurance, investments, and all that kind of stuff, and plugging those leaks so you keep more of what you make, and then you invest back in yourself. Think about production, think about expansion instead of reduction. They are probably okay for people who spend way more than they make, but that's only going to get you on track. That's going to be a very slow track governed by scarcity that's going to limit output. And they're right about this. The way I see in the old days, 20 years ago, 90% of the policies were designed so ineffective that it would take forever. And maybe they were better off being in a savings account and buying term insurance, maybe. But when I look at what's going on now, it's been an uprising. There's so many more people that are adopting this. I'm seeing far more people that are doing things the right way, and they're still talking about a narrative from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Like Dave still says your death benefit doesn't increase. Yeah, back when you bought a policy in 1940, the death benefit was level. But with PUAs, which are paid up additions, and dividends, the death benefit increases. So they're teaching on something that I don't even see anymore, as if it's still reality. So get out of the 50s, come to the 2021 and start helping people to do better.
It's just like that truck, right? That 1975 Chevy Silverado. If you had that thing in the driveway and you took it out for a joyride and you just hammered it, you're like, all right. And then you got in a brand new, exact same model, none of the frills. You got in a brand new Silverado and you hit the gas. You go, whoa, that's a little different. That's the same analogy. Like, I just use cars because everybody can associate that mental picture, but you're exactly right. What happened back then is totally different than now, but everybody's mindset's back there. Dave Ramsey, in my opinion, I did a YouTube rebuttal to him just like you did. Dave Ramsey doesn't even understand the infinite banking concept, and he has proven it. He doesn't even understand it, but he says he does. And when you listen to his infinite banking is a scam video, he blatantly makes a fool of himself. Dave Ramsey's ego has gotten so big, and so many others, I don't get Susie, Dave Ramsey, and even a lot of advisors, that they have reached the arrival syndrome. They feel like they can't learn anything new. So if it's not in their wheelhouse, then everybody should just say that it's no good. What I like to say is, people that Dave helps, and he does help millions of people. It's the bird that flew into your window and broke its wing. You brought that bird in, you put it in a cage, you fed it, you gave it water, you treated it, its wing mended. And the bird is now flying around in that little cage you gave it. It loves you because you got it to this health stage, but then it wants to go fly in the wild. It wants to be let free. Dave doesn't let the bird free. He says, nope, you're in my cage and you can never leave. That is a huge part of why people will not adopt this, can't understand this, and think this sounds too good to be true because they're stuck in a cage that, I hate to tell them, they created for themselves. And then they've surrounded themselves around people like Dave or their advisor that will not let them out of that cage. And therefore they're trapped. They call it the financial hamster wheel. Brent calls it the financial slavery. I'm sure you've got words for it, but it's sad is all it is. Because if they would just operate in an environment like the Rockefellers, like the wealthy, that have family offices, that don't have advisors that care about a commission or, oh my God, what product could I sell? They'd be fired the next day. They care about, how do I solve this family's problems? And those problems are always changing, just like everybody listening to this. Your money problems, they will never end. They will just evolve. One day it's, I don't have enough. The next day is, I have too much and I'm paying too much in taxes. Your problems just evolve and you constantly have to solve them. Do you think wealthy families just say, nope, I guess we're just going to have to deal with these problems? Heck no, they find somebody that can solve that problem. And that's what everybody listening to this has to do. I want to move into something I'm super excited about, because this is something like I never thought I'd hear. I never, ever thought you'd go this direction, but it makes all the sense in the world. Having listened to you, having, met you in person, in San Diego, you've got a sense of humor, and one that absolutely sometimes you kind of looking at it like, was he joking? He was. That was a joke. But you are taking the biggest, I'm going to call it a gamble, man. You're literally going out on a limb to do something that I can't imagine how you're going to do it, but you're going to teach win, then play. Can we talk about that for the rest of this program? Because I'm fascinated, because if this works, man, if this works, and I bet it will, because you will not stop till it does, you are going to be able to change so many more people's lives and solve so many more people's money problems that none of the stuff that I'm doing or any of us in our capacity are doing can do, because you're going about it from if you get people to laugh, man, you get them to listen. Can you talk about this?
So August of 2017, I started a bit of a hobby. Look, I was at a baseball game with my wife for my birthday, and I was making her laugh, which is tough to do sometimes. And she goes, where are you coming up with this? I'm like, from my brain. She's like, it's like not bad. And it was like a not bad. She wasn't giving me full credit. But that Sunday, I flew to Vegas and spoke at my friend Keith Yackey's event, and he introduced me as being hilarious. I'm about to give a 45-minute financial talk, and he keeps saying how funny I am. So I just told a few jokes, and it went really well. So I called my friend who's a comedian. I go, hey, man, I've got this premise that I look like Jesus. I just don't have his powers. So I want to write some jokes and try stand-up. So I did, and it went well enough that he said, hey, you should start opening for me. So for 2 years, I'm just opening for my buddy, and he's with one of my other friends, and I'm just having a good time. And they're filming a special, and I do a 10-minute bit, and there's a manager in the room, and he goes, what are you doing with this comedy thing? I'm like, I'm having fun. And he said, yeah, but you're a money guy. He goes, you know stuff comedians don't know. Have you ever thought about really taking this money angle with it? I said, maybe. I'm like, I'm willing to consider it. So I flew out and met with him. And April 15th, 2020, I filmed the full special. Marty Callner's my executive producer. He won an Emmy with Seinfeld. Pretty amazing. My director, Marcus Rayboy, was up for an Emmy for the Fresh Prince reunion. He's got a ton of specials on Netflix for comedy. Guys like Joe Coy, Daniel Tosh, like tons of people I really respect. And we filmed the special. And it's called The American Ream, and it's about money. And I got to tell you, man, it went better than I could have imagined. I mean, I worked on it like you wouldn't believe, but it was awesome. And so now I'm going to take it to 15 cities because people supposedly learn 3 times more when they laugh. So I'm like, what if we make this topic less intimidating, more inviting? We laugh at it. And then at the end, people go, oh, crap, I actually learned something from going out and being entertained. Entertainment is the language of the masses. I think it's the gateway to transformation. And so I'm committed to do one of the things I love most in comedy with the things I know best in money and taking the show on the road. So people could check it out, GarrettGunderson.gg. They can see some clips. They can see a little video that I did and what the 15 cities are as we go out here and do this tour. But I mean, dude, April 15th, what a perfect day to film a special called The American Ream. And I did 2 shows, and we whittled it down into 56 minutes from pretty much 2 hours and 25 minutes of content. And we're going to be pitching it to some of the streaming services. And ultimately, I need people's support. I think this is the way to learn. And so come out and see me in person. And if you don't think I'm hilarious, you'll learn something anyway. You know, everybody's got their own style of comedy, but dude, it's been received so ridiculously well. People have been maybe hurtful how shocked they are of how it turned out. Like, oh, dude, I had my really good friend Patrick go, I didn't know you were funny. I'm like, oh, dude, you're gonna get roasted for saying that, man. You know. But yeah, I went for a hike this morning, worked on my comedy set because kicking off the tour in Tempe at the Tempe Improv. I mean, it's then go straight to La Jolla to the Comedy Store, and we're hitting all the major cities. You know, DC and New York and Miami and Chicago and Austin and Dallas and you know, you name it.
Oh man, I love it. And you know, I always tell people, and I always talk about, you know, that 5 and that 95, but you know, I always like talking about Earl Nightingale. You know, he's just a hero of mine. And
Totally.
you know, in the one video that most of you have seen, you know, The Strangest Secret in the World, he goes on to talk about 120-year-olds. And he talks about asking them, are you going to be successful, you know, at the age of retirement? Let's call it 65. And all of them say, yes, yes, of course, I'm going to be successful. And then he talks about the fast forward to age 65, where only 5 of them are successful and the other 95% are not. And only one of them is wealthy. So out of 100 eager, optimistic 20-year-olds, only one is successful in the terms of being wealthy. And he talks about the difference. And he has said through his entire career and all of his research, he boils it down to one thing. And that one thing is creation. That one or those 5 successful created that financial destiny. What you are doing with this is you are creating something that no one had the balls to do, that no one thought would work, that no one was like tying together one of the most powerful things on earth, laughter. Like you're exposed to this, but so few people have had the ability to make somebody laugh in their life. But when you do that, you change their entire environment, their entire state of being, their state of mind is changed in that one moment of laughter. And you're going to do that because then their mind is open, changed, and ready to receive. And then you can teach them the truth about money and how money really works. I think that level of creation is so rare in the world, not just this country, but in the world. I commend you for doing that. And I am going to be a huge supporter of it. And folks, all of you need to go to GarrettGunderson.gg. Did I say that correct? We'll put it in the show notes, and you need to watch this. You need to get to, if he's in your city, like cancel everything you're doing and go watch this, because laughter and financial knowledge, but in a totally different light, the truth about money, what the wealthy do, you need this, folks. I think
man, we needed the court jester of finance, right? Like the court jester could always tell the truth. And so I'm like, it's time. And man, it's been rewarding and daunting at the same time. I mean, we did 2 shows on April 15th, and there's 8 cameras on me. We got this Emmy-winning lighting director. We got an Emmy-winning editor. We got an Emmy-winning executive producer. We've got Barry, my manager, who did Vicious Circle with Dane Cook and Whitney Cummings for a special, and that managed Chappelle for 8 years. I mean, I was like, okay, we're going to play in the big leagues here. And I got to tell you, it's the thing I'm most proud of in my career, because I thought Killing Sacred Cows at the time, we hit New York Times. I was like, this is amazing. This is higher quality than that book. I would put this ahead of that. I don't know, I'm talking about myself here. So I'll just say, like, it's reconnected me to relationships that are like, dude, I can't believe what you just put out. Like, cause I've just been sharing little bits with it. I got Cindy Crawford said, hey, I've read your books, but I didn't know you're this funny. I laughed out loud, you know, like, it's just crazy. The people that have come and seen it and watched it and previewed it. And I'm just excited to be with some people, especially during these times. I mean, we'll rope off a few places at every club for people that want social distancing or the concern about COVID, you know, so we'll be giving people some of their space that way. Others that aren't as worried or maybe already had it, they can kind of crowd into the other part of the club. But that is also an interesting time to do a comedy tour. Probably the most important time is when people have been stuck in quarantine and they're filled with fear, and especially with money fear. It's like, hey, we'll go through this and lighten it up a little bit, because when we laugh, dude, I just feel like people are present. They're not worried about what happened the other day. They're not fearing the future. They're just connected in that moment. And you know, I have some unique pieces that I don't think have ever been done in comedy. So not only, you know, the best way to own a category is be the only one in it, since I'm the only money comedian, but we created some pretty cool videos that go with this that they're not on the site, but they're going to be played that night of, that I think are going to be quite surprising.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. And it just goes back to what I said earlier. In order to design a game you can win, you must first know the game you're playing. He is designing a completely different game, but he knows the game. So folks, you're going to all have to learn how to win the game of money, but you got to get out of that cage. You got to get out of that cage, and you got to go seek the knowledge that the wealthy have and say, what is it that they do different than us? And folks, it is literally this simple. It is changing one thing. And it is changing where your capital is stored and where your capital goes first. From there, you can learn everything else on how to move your money the way the banks do and the way the wealthy do. And once you start moving your money and controlling the environment in which your money operates, everything will change. And, you know, the one thing as an advisor that we were never, ever, ever allowed to say, it was like a swear word. It was like forbidden. You know, you'd get taken in the back and spanked. And that word was guarantee.
Yep.
Folks,
illegal. Can't even say it.
Absolutely. Oh my God, you said that? Go to compliance right now. Tell them that there's going to be a complaint coming because you said the word guaranteed. We are so fortunate to be doing what we do and teaching what we do and guaranteeing people's capital and where they store it. And it is one of the most liberating things, is the fact that I can actually literally tell people, in this environment, this machine, this vehicle, whatever you want to call it, your money has a guarantee. And that pretty much goes without saying. So Garrett, it has been an honor that you were the first person I ever heard talk about this in the way that you did. And now to see that this is the only thing I do, nothing else. I do one thing, and that is what you started that long time ago. So I commend you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I will be your number one supporter for this new mission that you're on, because you are out there creating something no one else wanted to do. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome. For all of you folks, we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, go out there and change the environment that your money operates in. We'll see you then.